Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. This is Phoenix. To my elites, thank you so much for your dedication and love. It's reciprocated more than you can know. If you are new to the channel and you begin to like what you are hearing, please press that like and leave a comment. It lets the algorithm know that you enjoyed this video. If you would like to join Back to Ashes, please hit that subscribe button and set your bell to all. That way you know every time I upload a video. It's time to grab your blankets, your dog, your cat, your husband, your wife, your snacks, whatever it takes for you to relax. We are going to be jumping in to today's Vocal Melatonin entitled True Disturbing Break-In Stories. Right after this intro, an ad will play. Right after the first story, another ad will play. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Three months ago, something happened that still wakes me up in a cold sweat. I'm 14, living in South Africa, where break-ins, gunshots in the distance, and load shedding are just part of life. Our house is big, fortified with cameras, motion sensors, electric fencing, and 2 separate gates. Still, none of it felt like enough that night. We were all eating dinner together when my older brother suddenly froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I hadn't. He said it sounded like glass shattering on the patio, maybe a bottle. I brushed it off. He's always the jumpy one. Finished my food and went to the living room couch to cram for a Monday exam. A little later, my parents said their usual Saturday night goodbye and headed to the gym. The house felt quiet, normal. Then came the second crash, louder, unmistakable, right outside the sliding glass doors. Before I could even stand up, my brother burst into the room. I've never seen his face like that. Pale, eyes huge, breathing fast. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me for a long, frozen second. Then he hissed one word. "Upstairs. Move." He grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt and practically dragged me toward the staircase. Halfway up, I tried to ask what was happening. He only shook his head and kept pulling. When we reached the landing, he immediately lowered the big steel security shutter that separates the ground floor from the upper levels. We are drilled never to touch it except in a real emergency. It's heavy, slow, and meant to buy time against anyone trying to force their way in. He tugged me into his bedroom on the top floor, the one with the best view of the garden and patio. He pressed a finger to his lips, then pointed silently toward the glass. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, maybe a tall plant moving in the wind. Then my eyes adjusted. A man stood on our patio, holding the jagged neck of a broken wine bottle. Medium height, maybe 5'9", wild beard, filthy clothes. But what stopped my heart wasn't his size or the weapon. It was his face. Wide, unblinking eyes and a huge, unnatural grin. The kind you see in old horror movies or on someone who's completely come undone. He looked thrilled to be there. I opened my mouth to whisper something. Big mistake. His head snapped up. Those wild eyes locked straight onto mine through the window. The grin stretched wider. He broke into a lurching, uneven run toward the house, like he was hurt but too excited to care. My brother yanked me away from the window and pulled me down the hall to my room on the second floor. He kept murmuring, "It's okay. It's okay," even though his voice shook. He's always tried to protect me, being the big brother. We barely got inside when we heard it. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. The shutter was down. He shouldn't have been able to get past it. Then, right on cue, the power died. Pitch black. My brother swore under his breath. Without electricity, the shutter's magnetic locks release. It could be pried open with enough force. We were trapped. He locked my bedroom door, shoved a chair under the handle, and told me to stay quiet. I fumbled in the dark for the hunting knife I kept in my drawer. A birthday gift I never thought I'd actually need. I gripped it so tightly my knuckles ached. Then came the worst sound I've ever heard. Metal groaning as the shutter was forced upward, inch by inch. After that, silence. Too much silence. Then a new noise. Slow, scraping, something sharp, probably a blade, dragging across the outside of my bedroom door. Back and forth. Patient. Teasing. My brother whispered that he'd already phoned 112. That's our emergency number. We both knew help could take 30 minutes, 40, maybe longer. Response times here are unpredictable. The scraping went on forever. Every scratch felt like it was carving straight into my skull. Eventually, my brother made me climb into the wardrobe and close the door almost all the way. He took the knife from me, stood in front of the wardrobe, and waited. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes that felt like hours. Then finally, sirens. Blue and red lights flashing through the curtains. My brother hit the gate remote. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Different footsteps. Heavy boots. Voices shouting commands. They got him. Later, the police told us he'd escaped from a nearby psychiatric facility 3 months earlier. Before that, he'd been committed after 2 counts of manslaughter. They said he'd been off his medication for a long time. My brother saved my life that night. If he hadn't heard the first crash, if he hadn't reacted so fast, I don't want to think about what might have happened. Even now, months later, I sometimes jolt awake, hearing that slow scraping sound against wood. I tell myself it's just a nightmare, but it doesn't feel like just a nightmare. In the waning months of my late 20s, after a relationship had unraveled and left me financially adrift, I found myself compelled to share an aging brick house with 3 college companions. The place crouched on a shadowed, narrow lane just a short walk from the downtown bustle, neither a den of vice nor a bastion of safety, but somewhere in the indifferent middle ground where urban decay whispered rather than shouted. The building carried the weight of decades. Floorboards groaned underfoot like arthritic bones. Pipes clanked in the walls as though something inside them were restless. And winter winds slipped through warped window frames to leave icy fingers on the skin. Yet the rent was mercifully low, so we pretended the flaws were mere quirks of character. The house rose 3 levels, if one included that cramped attic, which had been clumsily converted into a bedroom barely large enough for a mattress and a desk. The rest of us claimed the more spacious rooms on the 2nd floor. Downstairs, the living area was furnished with a haphazard collection of secondhand sofas, salvaged from online marketplaces, faded fabrics clashing in cheerful disarray, while the kitchen permitted only 2 bodies at once without elbows colliding. We 4 had known one another since university days. Mark, my former roommate, possessed an almost unnatural serenity. Events that would rattle most people slid off of him like rain on glass. Sean filled every silence with his booming laugh and relentless quips. thriving on the captive audience we provided, whether we wished it or not. Sam, the youngest by a mere year, preferred the nocturnal glow of screens, his nights consumed by games or code, headphones sealing him in his private world. For the most part, the arrangement hummed along without friction, exactly the level of harmony one hopes for when youth and tight budgets collide. But on that particular Friday, fate conspired to gather us all beneath the same roof, an uncommon convergence. Mark and Sean lounged in the living room, the low murmur of a sitcom punctuated by their occasional chuckles. Sam remained sequestered upstairs, lost in digital realms. I sat cross-legged on my bed, scrolling through job listings on my laptop, the screen's cold light, the only illumination in the room. Near midnight, the house had settled into a fragile quiet, broken only by the distant television laughter, drifting upward like smoke. I was preparing to extinguish the lamp when the front door emitted a long protesting creak, distinct, deliberate, as though the house itself had inhaled sharply in surprise. At first, Mark and Sean assumed it was a late-night visitor, one of the casual friends who sometimes wandered in uninvited. They turned toward the entryway, smiles already forming. But the figure framed in the doorway belonged to no one we knew. He was tall, his hair disheveled and clinging to his scalp in damp strands. A filthy gray hoodie hung loosely on his frame. In his right hand, he held a knife, its blade catching the faint hallway light with a dull, malevolent gleam. He did not move. He simply stood, staring into the room, with eyes that seemed emptied of intent, of emotion, of anything human. Mark later confessed that for several frozen heartbeats, he wondered if the man was intoxicated, lost, perhaps unaware of his own actions. Then Sean's voice shattered the stillness, roaring up the stairs for someone, anyone, to summon the police. That shout seemed to awaken something in the intruder. He crossed the threshold in one measured step, fingers tightening around the knife handle until his knuckles blanched. I bolted upright at the sound of Sean's cry. Peering down the stairwell, I saw him there in the foyer, his worn shoes leaving faint dark smears on the hardwood, marks that looked almost like deliberate footsteps pressed into the grain. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A prank, a misunderstanding. But the knife silenced every rationalization. Sam emerged from his room at that same moment, headphones slipping from his ears. He halted mid-stride, eyes widening at the scene below. I hissed at him to call emergency services. My hand closed around the nearest heavy object, a thick glass lamp from my desk, and I gripped it like a makeshift club, palms slick with sudden sweat. Below, Mark and Sean fled through the back door into the cramped yard. The screen slammed behind them with a metallic clang. The intruder did not pursue. Instead, he lifted his head and fixed his vacant gaze directly on me, where I stood silhouetted at the top of the stairs, backlit by my bedroom light. Slowly, methodically, he began to ascend, one deliberate footfall after another, the ancient stairs creaking beneath him in protest. The knife remained extended before him like an accusation. His eyes never flickered with rage or madness. They were simply empty, pits of indifference that made the threat feel colder, more inevitable. Not once did he speak. The silence was worse than any scream. I retreated down the hallway, seized Sam's arm. He had just relayed our address to the dispatcher, and we fled upward to the attic room. We slammed the flimsy door and wedged a chair beneath the knob, its legs scraping desperately against the floorboards. Then we stood motionless, straining to hear over the thunder of our own pulses. The slow, rhythmic creaking resumed, each step a countdown. Then it stopped. Abruptly. No further sound. Was he paused on the landing, listening? Had he reconsidered? Turned back? The uncertainty clawed at us. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Outside, distant voices rose. Mark and Sean shouting to neighbors, pleading for help. We remained trapped in that stifling attic space, barely daring to breathe. Every creak of the settling house sounding like footsteps resuming their climb. 10 agonizing minutes later, sirens finally wailed closer. When we ventured downstairs, the intruder had vanished. The front door hung ajar, swaying gently in the night breeze, as though mocking our vulnerability. Police combed the premises, basement closets, shadowy corners, but found nothing. Only smudged fingerprints on the doorknob and scuff marks halting midway up the stairs, as if he had paused, considered, then simply departed. The lead officer delivered the news with weary candor. Such wanderers rarely face justice unless they struck again and left witnesses who could identify them. He pointed out, not unkindly but firmly, that the door had stood unlocked. A careless habit, he said, one we could no longer afford. We nodded, chastened beyond argument. The officers lingered over an hour, sweeping the yard and the narrow alley behind the house. But the man had melted into the night, as silently as he had arrived. When they departed, the four of us huddled in the living room, lights blazing, unwilling to separate into the darkened bedrooms above. Come morning, I drove to the hardware store and returned with deadbolts, a reinforced security bar for the back entrance, and a motion-activated floodlight that cast harsh white beams across the yard. We installed them that same day, tools clattering in hands that still trembled faintly. That night marked the end of complacency. A single unlocked door had invited something cold and wordless into our home, something that had climbed our stairs without hurry, without malice, without need for explanation. He had looked upon us, weighed us in its empty gaze, and chosen to withdraw. But the memory of those measured footsteps lingered long after the locks were changed, a quiet reminder that some thresholds, once crossed, are never fully sealed again. So to the creepy guy who just wandered into our home and then vanished like magic, let's not ever meet again. One of my earliest proper jobs was an overnight security guard in the town of Barry, just southwest of Cardiff in Wales. It was generally a straightforward gig, low-key sights with minimal excitement. The biggest threats were usually bored teenagers chucking rocks or the risk of dozing off and getting caught by a supervisor, rather than any real danger. As a fresh-faced kid straight out of school with zero workplace experience, my employers didn't hand me anything high stakes. I drew the beginner-friendly assignments: abandoned structures, empty building plots, places with little to nothing worth stealing or damaging. There was hardly any real value left on those spots, so the personal risk felt close to zero. Over my short stint in security, only a handful of memorable moments stood out. Once, I startled some idiots stripping copper wiring. They bolted the second they spotted me. Another time, a couple of addicts hunting for a quiet spot to use ran off when I appeared. And then there was a third incident, the one that still sticks with me. This is the story of that night. I was stationed at an old special educational needs school, slated for demolition, a place called Greenways. The building itself was considered too hazardous to enter, so my post was in a portable cabin in the former car park. For weeks, it had been dead quiet, no issues at all. Then, one random evening, a sharp crashing noise echoed from inside the school. It sounded like someone breaking in or smashing things up. Either way, it demanded a check. I grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight, which doubled as a solid club if needed, stepped out of the cabin, and headed toward the noise. Most trespassers fled at the sight of a uniform, so I wasn't overly panicked, just cautious. But the front doors had been forced open. That meant going inside the dark, derelict corridors to search. I wasn't the type to get worked up or take vandalism personally, but the idea of creeping through an empty school at night, sweeping my torch beam into shadowy classrooms, felt straight out of a horror movie. I braced for some jump scare moment. The instant I stepped through the doorway, though, the smell hit me. Petrol. Strong and unmistakable. It didn't take long to spot the intruder. We practically bumped into each other in a hallway less than a minute later. He held a jerry can in one hand, sloshing liquid everywhere, and a large knife in the other, covered in what seemed like blood. My focus locked on the blade. I started retreating slowly, keeping the light trained on it, repeating calmly, "No one's gonna hurt you here, mate. I'm not a threat, just let me back out." My plan was simple. Get outside, call the police, and let them handle it. From what I could make out in the dim light, he seemed like an ordinary guy. Late 30s or early 40s. Nothing obviously unhinged except the situation. He looked as scared of me as I was of him. All he said was, "Don't try to stop me." I assured him I had no intention of that. I even added that dousing an old wooden building in petrol was risky business. He could hurt himself badly. In hindsight, it sounds absurd, but I was trying to de-escalate, to signal I wasn't there to fight, even as every instinct screamed to run. He ignored me and kept pouring, moving down the corridor. Once I reached the exit safely, I shouted back, "You're not really going to torch this place, are you?" He spun around and let out a raw, broken scream. "You don't know what they did to me. You don't know what happened here. You don't know. You don't know. You don't know." The word bounced off the empty halls. What do you even reply to? Something like that. My mind raced, trying to process what horror could drive someone to this point. I had no answers then, and I didn't stick around to find any. As I hurried away, I caught one last thing he yelled. Something like Thelma, or maybe a name that sounded like it. At first, I thought he was crying out about a girl named Helena who suffered there, given it was a special needs school. My mind jumped to terrible possibilities of abuse. But I wasn't about to play detective. I needed distance. I needed it fast. The portable cabin felt too close that the whole place was going to go up in flames. So I sprinted across the car park, through the gates, over the dual carriageway, and into a lit bus shelter on the other side. From there, in a public spot with streetlights, I dialed 999. When the operator asked police, fire, or ambulance, I said probably all of them. I explained the guy with the knife, the petrol, his frantic state, and his intent to burn the school. They prioritized police response and kept me on the line to watch for smoke or flames. Time stretched. Adrenaline made it feel endless. I half expected him to back off or fumble the ignition. But eventually, the fire caught. It spread fast. The old building went up like dry kindling, flames roaring through the structure. Police arrived quickly, but stayed well back from the inferno, lights flashing outside the gate. I met them there and gave what description I could, mostly focused on the knife in my memory, his face a blur in the darkness and panic. After that, I left a voicemail for my boss about the blaze and headed home to my parents' place at around 1 a.m. Sleep wouldn't come. I stayed up until dawn, wired, replaying his words. Eventually, I searched online for the school. That's when I stumbled into the world of the satanic panic, the wave of accusations in the late 80s and early 90s across the UK and US, most of which turned out to be unfounded hysteria, like witch hunts. There was a big one in Wales around 1990 tied to a special school, but investigations found almost nothing substantiated. Mostly baseless claims with only a handful linked to actual neglect. But then I found references to a real case. A cult in Wales convicted in 2011 for horrific child sexual abuse, masked in occult rituals. The group drew from Aleister Crowley's Thelema philosophy, the do what thou wilt idea twisted into something dark and abusive. Details were grim. I won't go into them. That word he screamed, Thelema, clicked. Not Helena. Thelema. Maybe the school had some connection, or maybe he was just delusional, ranting from his own broken mind. I don't know the full story. I'm no investigator. Just an IT guy now, grinding overtime to cover bills. It could all be coincidence, an unhinged man with no real link. Or it could run deeper, darker than I'll ever dig into. Either way, that night was the closest I ever came to real danger and security. It's still the scariest shift I've ever worked. In the sun-baked suburbs of South Africa, where every home hides behind towering brick walls, crowned with snarling electric fences, high gates that clang shut like prison doors and alarms that wait silently for the night to betray them. Life moves with a quiet, constant vigilance. Crime isn't a possibility here. It's a certainty waiting for its moment. Gardens stretched wide and lush behind those fortifications. Green refuges where families pretend the world beyond the spikes can't reach them. Our family adored animals, so the garden belonged as much to our 6 dogs as to us. 2 steadfast Shar-Peis, 2 sleek German short-haired pointers, and 2 miniature dachshunds, whose yaps could pierce the thickest silence. They roam freely within the enclosed grounds, slipping in and out through the open veranda door on lazy days, guardians disguised as pets. We employed Ellie, our live-in domestic worker, and Vince, the gardener. Ordinary arrangements in a country where such help isn't a luxury but a necessity for most households. Their rooms sat quietly at the back, separate but part of the same fragile bubble of safety. This occurred in the sweltering summer of 2007. I was 9, my brother 10. That afternoon, our father arrived home bearing a small, thrilling surprise. Our very first cell phones. Sony Ericsson models, sleek and modern in our childish eyes. Too young, some might say, but in a land where danger never announces itself politely. They were tools for emergencies, lifelines to summon help when voices alone might not carry. Night fell heavy and humid, the kind of heat that clings to skin and makes open doors feel like invitations. Against every instinct, drilled into us by years of whispered warnings, the veranda door stood wide. The dogs milled about the garden, free in the darkness. Inside, my brother and I sprawled on our parents' bed, fingers fumbling over buttons, giggling at ringtones and tiny screams. And Ellie's 18-year-old daughter, who had always felt like an elder sister, sat between us, patient and teasing as she helped navigate the unfamiliar gadgets. Father drifted somewhere else in the house, Mother soaked in the bath, seeking relief from the oppressive warmth. Then Anne frowned. "Why won't those dogs shut up?" she muttered. She was right. The dachshunds yapped often enough at shadows or distant cats, but the bigger dogs usually stayed calm, aloof guardians. Tonight was different. Their barking rose in relentless waves, deep, guttural, and frantic. Not the usual brief outburst that faded quickly. This was persistent, edged with something raw and primal. Father appeared in the doorway, brow furrowed. "The dogs are going mad out there," he said quietly. "I'm gonna go see what's wrong." No panic yet, just mild curiosity. My brother, eager and fearless in that way only children can be, asked to tag along. Father nodded and they stepped out together into the night. I stayed glued to my new phone, lost in its glow, barely registering their departure. Beyond the swimming pool, the garden sloped gently downward in a series of stone steps that led to the shadowed lower reaches. A lamp usually bathed that area in pale light, but tonight it was dead. Black. Father noticed immediately. He had checked it recently. It had worked fine. A small detail, but in the stillness, it felt wrong. The dogs clustered at the top of those stairs, hackles raised, snarling toward the darkness below. They ignored his calls, refusing to break their vigil. A chill settled into his gut. He sent my brother back inside for a torch, an excuse, really, to keep the boy safe from whatever instinct now screamed at him. Alone, Father descended slowly. The dogs snapped and lunged at something just beyond sight, teeth flashing in the faint moonlight. At the bottom step, he saw the lamp, shattered, glass glittering like broken promises. Before the realization fully formed, cold metal pressed against his temple. A gun. From the blackness emerged 4 figures, balaclava masked, armed, silent until that moment. Shock rooted him in place. The one holding the pistol snarled, voice low and vicious. "Where's the boy? I saw you come out with a kid. He went back inside. Why?" Words tumbled out of Father before thought could catch them. "He's gone to press the panic button." Panic rippled through them like poison. They switched to Zulu, assuming he couldn't understand. A white man from the city, unlikely to speak the language. But Father had grown up on a farm, surrounded by workers who spoke it fluently. The words were as clear to him as English. "Shit," the gunman hissed in Zulu. "Cops will be here any second. Let's just kill him, grab what we can, and run." The others hesitated. A smaller one trembled, visibly, voice cracking. "I can't go back to jail. Not again. We need to move now." Fear fed on itself. Father seized it, switching back to English, feigning ignorance of their whispers. He added calmly, Our area has armed response patrols. They drive around constantly. The button's been pressed ages ago. They'll be here any moment. It shattered them. The nervous one spiraled, babbling about escape. Bickering erupted. Accusations, blame, crumbling resolve. The gunman's arm wavered, his attention shifting to his fracturing crew. Father backed up the steps, silent and deliberate. Then he turned and ran. Bursting through the open veranda door, he nearly collided with my brother, who was innocently returning with the torch. Father scooped him up mid-stride and bolted inside, not bothering to shut the door behind them, instinct overriding caution in that frantic heartbeat. He crashed into the bedroom, slamming the door. Upstairs, to the attic, now. There are 5 men outside, armed. They want to hurt us. The words landed like ice water. My body moved before my mind caught up, legs pumping toward the stairs, and close behind. Mother burst from the bathroom, clutching a towel, eyes wide with terror. We huddled in the dark attic, breaths shallow, every creak of the house amplified, waiting, listening for footsteps, shouts, gunshots, anything. Mother realized. No phone. Father's was downstairs too, but in my trembling hand, the new Sony Ericsson. She dialed emergency services. They asked our address, then said flatly it wasn't their jurisdiction. Click. Dead line. Fury and belief warred on her face. Then, Father remembered. The veranda door still gaping. Ellie and Vince, downstairs, unaware, vulnerable. He retrieved his firearm from the safe, voice steady but grave. Stay here. No matter what you hear, do not come down. I sobbed, pleading with him not to go, and wept openly, terrified for her mother. But we had to try. He vanished down the stairs into the unknown. The air thickened with dread. Outside, the dogs still raged, proof the intruders lingered on the property, circling like predators denied their kill. Mother from the private armed response service. 10 to 15 minutes, they promised. Stay hidden. We'll ring the gate bell when we arrive. Minutes stretched into eternity. Silence below, ominous, unbroken, except for the intermittent barking. Then, footsteps, stomping up the stairs. We froze. Eyes shut. Prayers whispered. Please, let it be him. It was. Father, Ellie, and Vince. Alive, breathless, herded into the attic. We waited longer, hearts hammering. Finally, the intercom buzzed. Father checked, armed response. Gates opened, the nightmare exhaled. We emerged shakily, knees weak from adrenaline's brutal grip. Security arrived. Police followed. In the garden, they discovered 7 sets of footprints. The intruders had bent the wall spikes, sealed over. 2 more shadows my father never saw, waiting unseen in the dark. A detail that still crawls under the skin. An electric fence came soon after. The officers noted the number of men, far more than a simple theft required. In South Africa, such groups often harbored darker plans, prolonged terror, torture. Worse. With 4 women in the house, Mother half-dressed, Anne young and vulnerable, the implications chilled deeper with time. Nothing happened to us that night. Father's quick lie about the panic button sowed chaos among them. His fluency in Zulu let him listen, exploit, survive. And our dogs, fierce, loyal, raised the alarm that saved us all. Rest in peace, Impy, Shoe, Dash, Fudge, Wrinkles, Pikachu. You weren't just pets. You were our angels in fur, barking against the night until the shadows fled. We owe you everything. Right after high school, in the wreckage left by the 2008 financial crash, I found myself scraping by in a way I'd never imagined. The economy had gutted my state, and what had once been modest hardship at home turned into outright destitution once I struck out on my own. A buddy and I rented the cheapest place we could find in downtown Phoenix, a crumbling apartment complex that looked one inspection away from being shuttered for good. Our unit was grim. Naked concrete floors, walls still rough plaster, and a front door so poorly fitted you could see daylight leaking through the edges. The desert heat wasn't brutal year-round, so survival was possible. But safety was another story. The building felt more like a war zone than housing. Screams and fights erupted at odd hours. Police tape and flashing lights became routine sights. Word spread about a stabbing in the nearby alley. And one night, a party turned deadly when someone pulled a gun. Gangs roam freely, even roughing up cops and bodybuilders who wandered too deep into the wrong blocks. The neighborhood demanded constant vigilance. I didn't own a car, so I walked or took the bus everywhere, keeping my head down, avoiding eye contact, steering clear of shortcuts through dark alleys. I'd grown up around urban grit, late-night shows, and dodgy venues, metal and rap scenes where trouble simmered. So I knew how to read a room, talk my way out of bad spots, and hold my own if words failed. I'd been in a few scraps and always walked away. My roommate, let's call him Mike, and I were both heavy pot smokers. Bills kept piling up despite full-time jobs. Him in retail, me doing security at a department store. And our pay barely covered rent and basics, even when we worked overtime. Selling small amounts of weed to trusted friends, coworkers, and family seemed like the obvious side hustle. We could smoke for free and maybe pocket a little extra. We started small, pulling a month's rent to buy a half pound, then flipped it quietly. No strangers, no big deals, just people we knew and could trust. We stayed low-key. Our door barely locked, so we weren't about to play tough guys or buy a firearm. That wasn't the plan. The night everything went wrong unfolded in two halves. I was stuck late at work, finishing paperwork, while Mike got home first. He followed his usual routine: basketball shorts, a cold Pepsi, a quick smoke, then settling in for some solo games until I joined for co-op. Around the time I should have been walking through the door, the handle rattled. Mike assumed it was me and opened up without thinking. Instead of me, 4 masked men shoved inside. A hand clamped over his mouth before he could shout. They dragged him to the kitchen, slammed him face down on the concrete, and started beating him for information about valuables. One ransacked the living room, stuffed our PS3 games, controllers, and anything portable into a pillowcase, while eyeing the TV. Mike fought back, kicking, spitting, struggling, but 4-on-1 was hopeless. Punches cracked against his face. His head bounced off the unforgiving floor. They tied his wrists and ankles with bootlaces, gagged him with one of their own socks, and kept tearing the place apart. Meanwhile, I finally clocked out, caught the bus, and started the 40-minute ride home. I walked the last stretch the long way, main streets only. No music in my ears, no shortcuts. As I climbed the exterior stairs to our second-floor unit, I noticed shadows moving behind the thin curtain. The door was closed, but the handle felt wrong. I unlocked it anyway. The moment I stepped inside, 3 ski-masked figures spun around me. I turned to run, but hands yanked me backward into the chaos. Our home was wrecked. TV smashed, drawers emptied, silverware and broken glass glittering on the floor, walls punched through like paper. They hauled me down the hall to the bedroom, where Mike lay hogtied, thrashing, wrists and ankles raw and bleeding. They bound my hands, but not my feet. Apparently, they ran short on laces. Then hurried back to their search, moving faster now that I'd showed up unexpectedly. Mike worked the sock gag loose enough to spit it out. "We gotta do something," he whispered. I nodded toward my bindings. They were sloppier than his. I picked at the knot while watching the hallway, terrified someone would catch me. It came undone quickly. Heart hammering, I crawled to Mike and started on his, tighter, more expert knots. It took agonizing minutes, maybe 10, but no one checked on us. We could still hear them ransacking the other rooms. Once Mike was free, something shifted in him. He was older than me, a combat veteran fresh from Afghanistan, still wrestling with PTSD. He crawled to his closet, pulled out an old steel military helmet, the kind from decades ago, and grabbed a baseball bat. Wearing nothing but one sock and those basketball shorts, he slipped the helmet on and vanished into the shadows of the hallway. I stayed frozen in the bedroom until I peeked out. The place looked empty except for Mike, bat raised, stalking forward. One of the robbers stepped from the kitchen into the hall, back turned, heading for the door with a box of our stuff. Mike swung full force. That bat connected with a sickening crack against the back of that man's skull. The guy staggered, but didn't drop. Before he could shout, Mike ripped off the helmet and hurled it like a projectile. Still met skull again. The robber crumpled, out cold. Mike spun, pointed at me. "Sit on him." Shaking, I crept over and knelt on the guy's back. He was snoring. Mike told me to search for a phone. I found 2. Ours, plus our wallets and some cash. I called 911 while Mike, helmet back on, charged outside after the rest of them. Police arrived fast. The complex was so notorious that cruisers were never far away. They cuffed the unconscious man, took my statement, and surveyed the destruction. Our weed stash was gone, taken along with everything else. So, no drug charges came our way. We didn't volunteer details about how hard Mike had hit the one they caught. The other 3 had loaded our belongings into a waiting car and vanished. We never recovered anything. The intruders were never caught. We couldn't afford to move right away. So we upgraded the lock, reinforced the door, and started picking through the curtain before opening up for anyone. We also quit dealing. Word had gotten out that we were a source, and that made us a target. Some lessons come at a brutal cost. A few years back, in the middle of the 2010s, my wife, our 3 children, and I desperately needed an escape from the rising crime and heavy atmosphere of our city. Life felt suffocating. So when my friend Derek generously offered his hunting cabin for Thanksgiving week, we jumped at the chance. I joined him on hunting outings before, but this trip was purely for family relaxation. No phones, no rush, just peace in the woods near the base of the Grand Tetons. The cabin sat in a quiet forested area, about 30 minutes from a small town, fairly secluded with only a couple of distant neighbors across a modest lake. After a tiring 6-hour drive, frequent stops thanks to our 4-year-old, we finally pulled up. The kids, excited from previous visits, bolted out, flung open the front door, and raced inside. Almost immediately, our 10-year-old daughter Lisa sprinted back out, face flushed with embarrassment and unease. Breathless, she told me there was already someone in the cabin. I hurried up the steps and pushed through the door. There, in the main living area, sat a stranger lounging on the couch in just his underwear, beer in hand, surrounded by empty bottles even though it was barely past lunchtime. Our 8-year-old son, who's autistic and struggles with strangers, and our youngest stood frozen, unsure of what to do. I demanded to know what he was doing there, my tone sharp. Lisa had mentioned he appeared to be touching himself when she first walked in, which instantly set me on edge. He jumped up, hands raised in a calming gesture. He introduced himself as Blake, claimed to be an old high school friend of Derek's. He said Derek had told him the place would be empty over the holiday, and since he was enduring a brutal divorce, he'd come to unwind. It sounded plausible. Derek could be scatterbrained like that. Always the easygoing type who might forget to mention something important. Blake came across as friendly enough, even apologetic. He offered to leave right away, explaining he lived only about an hour away and didn't want to ruin our family getaway. The cabin had limited bedrooms, and with our son's need for routine and space, I quietly accepted his offer, rather than insisting he stay. He asked for a couple of hours to shower, pack, and clear out, which felt fair. With no cell service at the cabin, I decided to drive the family into town. About 20 minutes, grab some snacks, treat the kids to ice cream, and call Derek to clarify the mix-up. At the general store, I dialed Derek and casually brought up his buddy Blake staying there. His reaction chilled me instantly. In a voice I've never heard from him before, panic and urgent, he said, "Blake? That guy who tormented me all through high school? I heard he got arrested for drug charges." I pressed him, describing the man I'd met. Derek grew more frantic, insisting I listen. Blake wasn't a friend. He'd been a cruel bully back then, eventually expelled. Later, he'd spiraled into meth production and use, got busted but released on a technicality, and had only gotten worse. Derek urged him to get my family away, stay in town, and return with the police. He even offered to send money for a motel, but I declined. He quickly contacted a friend in the sheriff's department. Soon, a deputy and officer met me outside town, and we drove back to the cabin together. The front door stood wide open. Inside was chaos. TV shattered, glass everywhere, the couch sliced open with a blade, profanity spray-painted across the master bedroom walls. The damage looked extensive, and not recent. The paint had dried, suggesting Blake had begun his rampage well before we arrived. The officers had me wait outside, initially while they cleared the place. When I stepped in, rage boiled over seeing the destruction. In the bathroom, something so vile had been left behind that I had to step out and steady myself. Then came a creak from above, followed by coughing, more creaks, more coughs. In attic crawl space, the officers located the hatch. A ladder dropped down. A dusty, disheveled head appeared. Blake, high, drunk, and wheezing from an asthma flare-up in the stuffy attic. He surrendered without a fight, handcuffed. He was taken away. More officers arrived to process the scene. Derek's deputy friend drove me back to town. My family and I checked into a cozy local hotel instead of staying at the ruined cabin. Derek later arrived with his wife and stepdaughter, our youngest close friend, and we turned the week into something positive, exploring the area where he had grown up. Derek took the vandalism in stride. Classic him. But the most disturbing discovery came from the guest bedroom. Rope, duct tape, a hatchet, and a licensed handgun. Whether he'd planned something far worse or simply carried them for his own twisted reasons, we'll never know for sure. What haunts me most is realizing this unstable, vengeful man, high, armed, and seething with old grudges, had smiled, chatted, and laughed with us, all while plotting to destroy Derek's property. And who knows what else. We were lucky he chose vandalism and flight over confrontation. Needless to say, Blake won't be on any future guest lists. My former girlfriend's younger cousin worked for a cleaning service in the city. She was regularly sent to the same upscale home 3 times a week. A wealthy, elderly man who lived by himself. One day, they had a falling out. He lodged a complaint with her employer, and she was let go. She was furious and vented nonstop about how pathetic he was, swimming in cash yet completely alone, with no one to spend it on. What really stood out, though, was her mention of a large safe tucked away at the back of a closet. That detail lodged in my brain like a hook. By the end of that week, I'd put together a scheme to see what was inside. To be blunt, back then I was garbage, a full-time crook. I served my sentences since, and I carry no illusions or remorse about most of it. For years, robbery and home invasions were how I paid the bills. I'd pulled off plenty of armed jobs without getting caught. One single bust ruined everything, but it wasn't even the worst thing I ever did. That might not click for you now, but by the time I've shared this, it still might not. That's okay. I'm just as lost on it. We spent about a week watching the place, learning the floor plan, his schedule, his habits. Breaking in wasn't some high-tech operation. On a bright, sunny morning, we simply approached the front door, pressed a pistol to his face, and marched him inside and upstairs to the bedroom, where the safe waited. Most people, once they realize you've been studying them and that you're not bluffing, hand everything over, especially if family is involved. This guy had no one, and he flat out refused to give the combination. We were ready for resistance. We hauled him into the bathroom, gagged him with his own soiled underwear, and started waterboarding. We'd only done anything like that once before. I never liked it. Only sick people enjoy inflicting pain. To me, it's just a means to an end. Fast, effective, no noise. The victim panics, but isn't truly harmed, and almost no one holds out long. This solitary middle-aged man endured it far longer than seemed possible. We stopped, yanked the gag out, demanded the code again. He pressed his lips tighter, refusing to let us shove the wet fabric back in. We repeated the process 4 or 5 more times. Still nothing. Then, he finally spoke. I'll remember his words until my last breath. Just kill me, please. He sounded shattered, on the verge of tears. It threw us. One of my crew switched tactics, trying the reasonable angle. Look, nobody needs to die here, old man. Just tell us the damn code. He shook his head no. Back went the gag, more rounds of it. Eventually he broke again. This isn't what you think it is. Please, stop. Another partner pulled him from the tub, pinned him down, and warned us to cover his mouth. Then he jammed a taser into the man's groin. That did it. He gave up the combination. We punched it in. The safe clicked open. Empty. At least of anything valuable. Just stacks of what appeared to be books and a pile of old VHS cassettes. That was our first real mistake. Rage took over. One guy stormed off to ransack the other rooms for jewelry, watches, anything to avoid walking out with nothing. The rest of us stayed, guarding the man and tearing through the safe's contents. Maybe valuables were hidden cleverly. Diamonds glued inside book bindings, cash taped inside cassette shells. We started with the tapes, smashed a few open. Nothing. Then the albums. The second one we flipped through stopped us cold. I only glimpsed a couple of images before I slammed it shut. They were horrific. The children in them were very young. I won't describe them further. Before I could process it, my partner, who'd seen his own set of photos, lost it completely. Something snapped. He snatched a golf club from the corner, strode over, and caved the man's skull in with one brutal swing. Not enough to kill instantly, but close. Our third guy returned with a few trinkets stuffed into his pockets. He walked in, saw the body and the scattered albums, and panicked. We all knew we had to bolt, leave the state, hell, maybe the country. A prominent local beaten to death in his own home, surrounded by evidence of child exploitation? That would draw massive heat. Local PD, maybe feds if they tied us to the material. We split up and went dark. I drove far out of state to some quiet, unremarkable small town. Decent enough spot, but nothing I'd miss if I had to run again. Days went by, then more. No news, no headlines, no radio alerts, no TV bulletins about a break-in, a murder, or even a missing resident. We stayed glued to every news source, waiting for the description, the sketches, the manhunt. Nothing. We figured maybe the police were playing it close, luring us out, but no sting ever came. Years later, I got arrested on unrelated charges: burglary, grand larceny, fencing stolen property. I was sure the old case would surface then. It didn't. I served time, got out, and still silent. I've considered dropping an anonymous tip to the authorities. It would almost certainly send me back inside for life, but the not knowing eats at me. People get away with murders sometimes, sure. But this? No one even admits a murder happened. No body reported. No crime scene acknowledged. No scandal. Someone, some powerful someone, made sure the contents of that safe never surfaced. Whether to shield an individual, a network, or something bigger, I can't say. It wasn't to shield us, that's for certain. There are others who know what went down that night, and whatever private justice they're pursuing is what still keeps me awake all these years later. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to these true disturbing break-in stories. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the membership of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for your continuous devotion and dedication. I always say it, without you, there is no me, there is no Back to Ashes. It would just be me sitting here talking to myself. So, thank you. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. Until next time, please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.